Dopamine lies to us.
Yes.
It tells us if you get this thing I'm making you desire, you'll be happy forever. Your life will be changed and everything will be great. And that's a lie. Once you have a resource, dopamine has no interest in it anymore. That's what I think a lot of people understand about dopamine. But there's more.
What's your take on dopamine detoxing?
Yeah. All right. So I think
Daniel Lieberman is a clinical psychiatrist, award-winning professor of behavioral sciences, and expert in dopamine, the most misunderstood and possibly the most important concept in all of biology. He has consulted with the US government on psychiatry, drug, and alcohol policy. He is the co-author of the international bestseller, The Molecule of More, which has been translated into 20 different languages and is one of the most influential books written on dopamine ever. Make your dopamine neurons incredibly happy today by subscribing to the channel.
I had a patient, he liked picking up women, and he was very successful at it. There was a study about pornography in which they measured dopamine in their brain. The first time they showed them a picture, big dopamine. But when they saw repeated pictures, the dopamine flatlined. So this patient of mine, what he found was that he was getting his dopamine hit when the woman said, yes, I will go back to your apartment with you.
Right.
Once he got back to the apartment, the dopamine was gone.
Wow.
He didn't even want to have sex with them anymore. He said, what's wrong with me? I absolutely can't enjoy this. And so it's a good thing that life is hard. It's a good thing that we face challenges, and it's very unhealthy to pretend that there are shortcuts. I think that that's the mistake that people make, not understanding that dopamine's only about novelty, and that's why it's more. It will never let you rest.
I read The Molecule of More about a year ago, and I was just explaining to you off camera that I think it was one of the most influential neuroscience books I've ever read, and I really mean that. I was looking back over the notes, and about 30% of it was underlined, which sort of defeats the purpose of underlining what's important, because there was just so much good stuff in that book. And what I got from it was just a so much more nuanced and well-rounded understanding of what dopamine actually is and what its impact on us is, which is very substantial. And that's what I hope the listeners will leave this conversation with today. But maybe a good place to start is, what are the key moments in your life and career that have really led you up to that moment of writing that book, The Molecule of More?
You know, I think I'd have to go back a long way to answer that question, all the way back to undergraduate education. I went to an unusual school called St. John's College, where there are no textbooks, no lectures, and no written exams.
Wow.
We read the great book of Western civilization, original sources only, and sit around in small groups to discuss them. And the great books encompass literature and history, science, math, philosophy. And so it really gives you a broad, holistic view of knowledge in general. And I carried that with me to medical school. In medical school, I really had to focus on the science. But I kept in the back of my mind the philosophy, the poetry from my undergraduate education. And I think that that came in handy when I was writing The Molecule of More, because dopamine spans so many disciplines.
Right.
It plays a big role in human behavior. It plays a big role in art and creativity, in business, and of course, in science. So, as I began my career as a psychiatrist, dopamine kept coming up. And what surprised me was the way it came up in so many different contexts. So, for example, we're told that people who live with addictions, they have a problem with their dopamine system. But so do people with schizophrenia and attention deficit disorder. And it puzzled me, why is it that dysfunction of this one single neurotransmitter is leading to illnesses that on the surface appear so different? And when I started digging, when I started doing some research into that, what I found absolutely fascinated me. And I thought, I've got to share this with the world. This is important.
Amazing. You're so right. It does span so many disciplines, and it's such a hot topic right now. Let's take a few steps back and really take this from the start. What is dopamine?
So dopamine is a molecule. a fairly small, fairly simple molecule that acts as a neurotransmitter. And what that means is, the brain consists of billions of brain cells called neurons, and they communicate with one another by releasing tiny amounts of chemicals across tiny fluid-filled gaps called synapses. And when the presynaptic cell, which is doing the releasing, releases the neurotransmitter that stimulates receptors on the postsynaptic cell, it changes in some specific way the behavior of the postsynaptic cell. Maybe it'll make it more active, maybe it'll make it less active, maybe it will modulate it in more complex ways. And dopamine is one of these neurotransmitters, and not very many brain cells in the brain use it. I think it's 0.00005%. It's almost just a handful. But
Right.
what's amazing about it is that it projects all over the brain, and it sort of acts as a conductor, bring this up, bring this down. And by doing that, it has enormous influence over our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors.
Beautiful. I love the analogy of the conductor. And it is an astonishing fact that there really is such a tiny minority of neurons that do produce dopamine, right? That's maybe not something that penetrates the general population very often, because dopamine is probably the most known neuroscience word, yet only a really small fraction of neurons actually produce it. What makes it so important?
I think to answer that question, we have to look at evolutionary issues. The role of the body, and of course the brain is part of the body, is to keep us alive and reproducing. And there are many strategies that evolution has developed for human beings. Many of them are complementary, but some of them are competitive. And the competitive ones give us balance, sort of like the way the accelerator and a brake in a car act in opposition, but together they allow us to have fine control over the car's speed. So dopamine's role is to focus us on the future, and specifically maximizing resources in the future. And so dopamine makes us want things. It gives us the motivation and energy to pursue them. It gives us rewards, makes us feel good when we do things that make resources more likely to occur in the future. And that's what I think a lot of people understand about dopamine. But there's more. Dopamine also serves a more sophisticated function of allowing us to think in abstract terms. So the future doesn't exist in real physical terms. It's just imaginary. But what dopamine allows us to do is to imagine this future and play with it. We make models in our brain. What would happen if I did this? And I can give you an example. And I think an interesting example is actually dopamine in a non-human. Humans have the greatest density of dopamine receptors in their brains. I think second to that is a surprising animal. People might think of apes or dolphins.
Right.
It's actually corvids, crows, blackbirds.
Wow. That
Yeah,
is interesting.
ravens.
I never knew that. You do sometimes hear crows being quite sophisticated with their behavior, but you're right that my brain initially went, okay, great apes, maybe dolphins. That's exactly where you leap to. Crows,
Yeah.
not so much.
If you look on YouTube, corvid intelligence, see some amazing videos. One example is the corvid is thirsty, and there's a glass of water, but it can't reach it because the water's too low. Can't get its beak down in there. So using dopamine, it makes a model of what's going on, and it can play what-if scenarios. And by doing that, it picks up pebbles and it puts pebbles in the glass to displace the water and raise the level until it can drink.
Wow.
So
That's cool.
That's what imaginary models allow us to do. A human example is I'm in Washington, D.C. If I want to go up to New York City, I can take the bus, I can fly, I can take a train. Bus is cheap, train is comfortable, airplane is fast. And I can sort of put myself in those different situations and see how I feel about it. Think about how it meets my needs. We might call that mental time travel. So dopamine not only makes us desire things and gives us energy and motivation to get them, it also gives us very sophisticated cognitive tools to make plans and work with abstract concepts like mathematics and the laws of nature to achieve those longer term goals.
Right. That's really, really well explained. Do we know how it does that? How it's such a master conductor of these really abstract ideas and concepts like, I want to improve my health. I want to get better sleep. I want to learn how to do computational neuroscience, whatever your goals are. I mean, the stepping stone to get to each of those goals is entirely different. There's going to be some overlap, of course, but they're so different. And dopamine is able to orchestrate those stepping stones and give you a clear vision of where to go. But do we know how? Like, how can it do such a complicated thing when it's only this, weird chemical group?
Yeah. Remember, dopamine is the conductor, not the musician.
Right.
So the tools that are making us do these very complicated things are the neurons in the prefrontal cortex. That's the part of the brain that's right behind the forehead. From an evolutionary point of view, it's the most recent development. It's in some ways what makes us humans. Humans have the largest prefrontal cortex. So what dopamine is basically doing is saying, use this tool. You got this tool. Now is the time to use it. And I think we can understand that better if we look at a psychiatric illness in which dopamine is not functioning well in that area. And that's attention deficit disorder. So people with attention deficit disorder have the capacity to focus, to use concentration, to organize things in an appropriate way, but their dopamine system is not turning these tools on. And so they're underutilized and they lie dormant.
Right.
If we treat them with a stimulant, such as amphetamine, methylphenidate, in the United States, the brand names are like Ritalin and Adderall. They're probably, that artificially turns up the volume on these dopamine circuits. And so now these tools are activated. So it's not dopamine doing the magic. It's dopamine turning on the tool.
Right. That's more its function as a neuromodulator. It's controlling how circuits are working together.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah.
Perfect. Let's go into the other, because this other mental model that people have of dopamine usually doesn't include this control circuit, how you say it in the brain. Usually dopamine is about social media, it's about drugs, it's about pornography, it's about addictions. Let's set a really clear boundary between these two sets of dopamine circuits and talk about how they differ, how they're the same, just really the desire circuit and the control dopamine circuit.
Yes. So in the book, as you say, we label the two circuits, the desire circuit and the control circuit. Just to give the technical term, the desire circuit is technically called the mesolimbic circuit. Meso refers to the midbrain, middle of the brain, where dopamine is produced. And limbic is the limbic system, which is a pretty ancient part of our brain that's responsible for more primitive things, things like desire to reproduce, desire to eat, to win competitions, that sort of thing. And that's the area of dopamine function that most people think about when they think about dopamine, right? The reward we get from having sex, from eating when we're hungry, from finding something relevant to us on social media. The other circuit, though, the more advanced circuit, is the mesocortical circuit. Starts in the same place, midbrain, where dopamine is produced. But instead of going to the limbic system, it goes to the prefrontal cortex. So it's the mesocortical circuit. We call that the control circuit because it's designed to give us control over our environment through planning and using sophisticated abstract tools.
Awesome. Give us an example of a few people that come to mind when you think of a hyperactive dopamine control circuit and a hyperactive dopamine desire circuit, because there's probably names that people are immediately going to, but let's put some names on those.
Names are going to be tough for me. I spend all my life with my nose in books and medical journals. And so I don't know the popular culture right now, but I can paint a picture. All right. Somebody who has an overactive desire circuit and perhaps a weaker control circuit, this might be somebody who pursues a hedonistic lifestyle.
Right.
So somebody who likes to hang out in bars where there are flashing lights and loud music. They like a lot of stimulation. They're at risk of developing addictions. And I had a patient who he was a ladies' man, and he liked picking up women, and he was very successful at it. But after a while, it became boring. And that's one of the pitfalls with dopamine. In psychiatry, we call it tolerance. You develop tolerance very, very quickly to dopamine stimulation. So something get you very, very excited the first time, and then much less after that. There was a study about pornography in which they took people who had a pornography use problem and also just ordinary users of pornography, and they measured dopamine in their brain as they viewed pornographic content. And what they found was the first time they showed them a picture, big dopamine. But when they saw repeated pictures, the dopamine flatlined. Right. When they showed them a new one, they got another spike. So this patient of mine, he got very bored with it. And what he found was that he was getting his dopamine hit when the woman said, yes, I will go back to your apartment with you.
Right.
Once he got back to the apartment, the dopamine was gone.
Wow.
Because he had already achieved the maximization of future resources, a new sexual partner. And then the dopamine was done. He didn't even want to have sex with them anymore. And that's one of the things that led him to come with me. He said, what's wrong with me? I absolutely can't enjoy this.
Right. You've such a good example in the book. Sorry to interrupt. I think it perfectly backs up your point. Mick Jagger told his biographer in 2013, I thought this was phenomenal, in 2013 that he had been with over 4,000 women, a different partner every 10 days of his adult life. It's a pretty staggering number. Dopamine's prime directive is more, the molecule that cultivates perpetual dissatisfaction. After he beds a lover, his immediate goal will be to find another. I thought that really summarized, I think, exactly where you were going with it.
Yeah, and I want to briefly comment on the eternal dissatisfaction.
Right, big point.
Yeah, dopamine plays a lot of wonderful, wonderful roles in our life. Motivation, creativity, all sorts of great stuff. But you have to keep in mind that its prime directive is to maximize future resources. Once you have a resource, dopamine has no interest in it anymore because we got it. It's on to the next thing because we've got to maximize. And that's the dark side of dopamine, that it makes us very excited about getting things. Once we get it, though, dopamine turns off and it's on to the next. Buyer's remorse, I think, is a good example. So it's not always our friend. It makes us dissatisfied to keep us on that hamster wheel, increasing the odds we're going to stay alive and reproduce for evolutionary sake.
Right. I think that's probably the most poignant idea that I got from the book, and it's summarized very nicely in the wanting system in the brain is completely distinct from the liking system. That's a staggeringly impactful statement when you really think about it. It means that
it's so important to be aware of that.
Right. It means that the intensity, the real emotion that we feel towards wanting something is just completely separate to if we would actually be happy once we got it. Like once you realize that those are just separate systems, they're completely different. They might not be communicating with each other at all. It means that the intensity and desire that you have for, the expensive car or the mansion or the woman or the man or the cigarette or whatever it is has zero bearing with how good you'd feel once you have it. That idea kind of blew my mind, like that they're completely distinct. I think if people could take away one thing from this episode, it would be that. That's staggering to me.
Yeah, and we give the example in the book of a guy smelling a hamburger cooking, and oh my God, it smells so good. And he imagines how great it would be. So he goes, he orders it, and he eats it, and it's not that great. And I think we've all experienced that.
Yeah. The sleazy car salesman, I think, is another example you give. The car salesman who will just pull every bag of trick that he has to try and get you to purchase the car. That's dopamine, you know, envisioning your life in that car. Like imagine going down that road 140 miles an hour, wind in your hair, girl on your, like envisioning that future, right? Making it as tantalizing as possible. And then once it's sold, he walks off and he doesn't care anymore. He doesn't care. He doesn't care at all if you actually enjoy that car, if you wanted it, what value you're going to get. He cares about his 5% commission, whatever it is, you know. I thought that was another really good analogy for it.
Yeah, dopamine lies to us.
Yes.
It tells us if you get this thing I'm making you desire, you'll be happy forever. Your life will be changed and everything will be great. And that's a lie. You'll be happy for 5 minutes, perhaps 5 days, maybe 5 weeks, but it's going to go fast.
Right. What are some examples of a personality trait of someone who is highly dopaminergic in the control circuit then?
Yes. So if we look at someone who's got an imbalance on the control side, this is going to be someone who needs to be very much in control of their environment. They might be somebody who has features of obsessive compulsive personality. They might be a workaholic, somebody who is constantly on their laptop, on their phone, working for a future that never arrives. Working for a promotion. They get the promotion, they're not happy, they're working for the next one.
Right.
Working for a raise, same thing. Maybe telling themselves, if I can only XYZ, then I can be happy and ease off. But that's not true. Their dopamine is driving them in a way that they can't control. So that might be somebody who's got too much control dopamine. I'd like to look at people who've got too much on both sides, because in some ways they're the most interesting.
Right.
And this would be the artist or the scientist or the inventor who is absolutely obsessed with their project.
Right.
They work on it all day and all night. They don't eat, they don't sleep, they don't bathe. That's all they can think about. And these people do wonderful things for society, but they're generally not all that happy.
Right.
Right, because they're just obsessed with accomplishing something. Once they accomplish it, it's on to the next thing. We give the example of Buzz Aldrin, second man to walk on the moon.
Right.
And when he returned, a reporter said, what was it like, stepping foot on the freaking moon?
Yeah.
And Buzz said, it was just something we did. Now we should do something else.
Yeah.
No sense of, wow, I spent a lifetime working for that moment. It's so meaningful. Now it's done, on to the next.
Yeah. Like what we really want to be able to do is flick the switch of dopamine that propels us in the direction. But then once we get there, turn it off and just, you call them here and now chemicals, which are serotonin, oxytocin, our anandamide, endocannabinoid system, all of those things. What you really want is dopamine will get you to the moon, but then you want it completely gone once you're there. Like you want to switch it off and drain it to zero. I mean, probably not zero, obviously, but you just want to enjoy that moment. You want serotonin dominating. You want oxytocin dominating.
You don't want to think about what's next.
Right.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
Right. I am standing on the moon. I need to soak this in and experience not the future, the present.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of wellness interventions are about. As a culture, Western civilization is very dopaminergic. We're
Right.
very focused on more, better, what's next.
Consumption.
Yeah, and that leads us to having a very imbalanced approach to life. And so, in order to be able to make that switch, I worked really hard. I got it. Now let me enjoy a little bit.
Right.
You got to work. You gotta muscle up those here and now neurotransmitters in your brain.
Absolutely. Another obvious one that sticks out would be Elon Musk, just accomplishing the world and back multiple times. And I've heard him on podcasts say, like, you wouldn't want to be me. My mind is a storm. I'm never contentful. I'm never resting. My brain is a battleground of ideas. And, that doesn't sound desirable. I am, Lance Armstrong, I think, is another example you talk about in the book.
And I think that, at times, depending on how the stock market works, he's the richest man in the world.
Yeah.
But he sleeps on friends' couches in order to be close to his factory. He
Right.
doesn't have a yacht. He doesn't take European vacations. He just works and works and works.
Yeah. And has never really been able to hold down a stable relationship, has, I don't know, 12 kids now or something, 13 kids, some large amount. Because I guess he can never give the time to that relationship. Also probably a real symptom of that really high dopaminergic control circuit drive.
That's right. When we engage in relationships and emotional intimacy, we activate oxytocin, and that's a here and now. You can have a relationship with a person that's focused on the future, right? When I interact with my coworkers at work, we're focused on the future, and that's what we do. But other times, it's very much about the present. We're not working towards anything. We're just enjoying each other's presence. That's here and now, and that's probably something Elon Musk has a great deal of difficulty with.
Right. I want to go further down that line because, again, dopamine is so often in the context of drugs and technology, and those things are incredibly important, and we might touch on them later if we have time. But I think dopamine and relationships is also just an incredibly interesting avenue, and maybe even more relevant to people. How does dopamine impact our relationships, sexual and intimate relationships mostly?
Yeah, so it plays a big role in falling in love. A lot of people feel that falling in love is one of the most intense, pleasurable experiences human beings have.
Right.
It just absolutely transforms our world, especially if we're confident that the other person loves us.
Yeah.
It's just that, wow, I never knew life could be this great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Feels like it's going to go on forever. That's dopamine lying, of course. But it's characterized by just this passionate longing for the other person. It only lasts about 12 to 18 months. I've seen some couples have it last longer. And then when it's over, one of two things can happen. One thing that can happen has happened with my patient is they say, oh my gosh, I was wrong about this person. This person is not the divinity I thought they were. They're an ordinary person with annoying habits, and I need to go find someone else.
Right.
That's one thing that can happen. And then you find someone else, you fall in love, and it's a merry-go-round. You just go around and around and around the cycle, never moving forward. The other thing that can happen, which is much better, is to have passionate love evolve into something called companionate love. Passionate love is driven by dopamine. Companionate love, though, is driven by the here and now neurotransmitters. And it feels different. It's not this insanity of being head over heels in love,
Right.
but it's more of a feeling of satisfaction. It's the fulfillment that comes when another person's life is deeply entwined with your own. You know they've got your back. You know they're going to support you. They're going to be there for you. And that's something that evolves in very, very long-term relationships. And in some ways, I think it can be even nicer than that insane, passionate love.
Right.
It's just a feeling of fulfillment and contentment.
What do you think are the factors in play that influence if that dopaminergic time in the relationship lasts for 6 months, lasts for 12, lasts for 18?
Difficult question. I wrote another book called Spellbound, and it's about the unconscious mind.
Right.
And I think that we're going to have to go there. It's about unseen forces, thought processes that we are unaware of going on in both partners.
And what are those unconscious processes?
The unconscious mind is very, very complicated.
Right.
But basically what we have are, when we fall in love, we see the other person as being more than human. There's something incredibly special. They are a divinity. That's how we feel about them. Of course, they're not really in reality. But we have this image of the perfect man or the perfect woman within us. That's something that is we're all born with. That's something, just like all humans have 2 ears, 2 eyes, 1 nose, a heart, and a liver. We also have these forms within our brains that we're not aware of, unconscious mind. One of them is the perfect lover. And what happens is we project that onto the other person. And that's what we see. We don't see the reality. And so the duration of that passionate love will be the length of time that projection survives.
Right.
There are many things that can break the projection. For example, the person doing something that you're like absolutely amazed at, like they say something unbelievably hurtful and insensitive, that could easily break the projection. So there's a lot of factors at play, but it's the projection of the ideal lover that has a lot to do with how we perceive people in that passionate love stage.
Makes a lot of sense. Do you think that projection is desire dopamine or control dopamine? You know, that it's not so obvious which dopamine system is creating that false illusion in that case, because it's maybe a mix of both, and probably there is mixes of both in these things. You know, it's never really as lacking in nuance as this or this. I presume there's bits of both. Have you kind of been able to tease that apart?
Yeah, the unconscious mind seems to express itself most clearly in dreams. That's because the consciousness is cut off, and the chaotic, very alien thought processes of dreams gives us a sense of just how different the thought processes of the unconscious are compared to the conscious mind. But I do want to remind you that dopamine is the conductor, and so it is. And when we dream, it's the desire dopamine that's driving the show.
Okay.
So I think it's the desire dopamine circuit that's activating these unconscious places in the brain. But again, dopamine is just turning up and down the volume.
Right. Okay, that's interesting that we know that that's desire dopamine, because, that's not necessarily a terrible thing to project. Obviously, the projection of this divine person has to be somewhat grounded in reality. You'd hope that you're projecting a very good idea of the person and it's somewhat related to how they actually exist. But you could see that as a positive thing, whereas desire dopamine usually betrays us. It's usually not in our best interest.
I don't agree with that. Not at all. Because remember, clinical depression is a terrible illness.
Yes.
I don't know if you know anyone who's ever suffered from it.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, one of the symptoms is a lack of desire. And that is a horrible, horrible thing to experience. It's hard to imagine how bad it is unless you've gone through it. But you wake up in the morning and there's nothing you want. It makes the world feel absolutely empty, gray, and meaningless. So it's the desire. And in some ways, you can't understand the world without desire, right? If no one thing is better than anything else, you can't make judgments. You don't know what to do. And so desire, and then it gives us the motivation, the excitement. If you think about some assignment that you have no interest or desire in, it's absolute torture grinding through it. You'd rather clean out the kitchen cupboards than write some damn report you're not interested in. On the other hand, if you're writing something that fascinates you, the time goes by and you're not even aware of it. You're just in it. That's desire dopamine.
Right.
So it's good and bad. It's a double-edged sword, like many things in life.
Right. Okay. Again, because that was a sort of a faulty jump that I made then, where I assumed that if you were motivated to do an assignment, that would be control dopamine, because it's sort of orchestrating the steps. It would still feel good, but that's still desire. Okay.
No, what control dopamine is doing is it's organizing the information that you need to do it. It's planning. I need to do a Google search. I need to do an interview. I need to look up some old data. It's figuring all of that out. But the energy that's driving it, the interest, hopefully even the fascination, that's all coming from the desire circuit.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. Let's tease apart desire circuits more then, because I'm curious, like, somebody has say somebody has a very reinforced desire circuit for watching TikTok, which I think is something that a lot of people have at the moment, one social media or another, whether it's Instagram, Reels, TikTok, YouTube, whatever it is. Those desire circuits are very hardwired in that person. How does that affect their tendency to do drugs, their tendency to watch porn, their tendency to, pursue those things that aren't in their best interest? Like, how overlapping are those desire circuits? Are they different? Are they distinct? Is there some overlap, but they're sometimes different? People have a lot of impulses, a lot of tendencies for these things, but I'm curious to just tease apart, how do those desire circuits really differ?
Yeah, there does seem to be some overlap. You sometimes hear people say, I've got an addictive personality.
Right.
I need to be really careful with anything that I find rewarding, because I just lose control very, very quickly. And that's someone who's got an imbalance between desire and control. And it's worth mentioning explicitly, the desire and the control circuits can often act in opposition. So the desire circuit may say, oh my God, that donut looks delicious, gimme.
Yeah.
And the control circuit goes, that's going to be pleasurable for about a minute, but if we think about our long-term health, it's not a good idea. So the control circuit will often say no to the desire circuit.
Yeah. How much is that? I just had a social neuroscientist on the podcast, and we dove into these incredible, I'm very interested in the self at the moment, how your self-identity and the things that you really identify as, how that regulates and controls behavior. So, how that, you could envision that neural process going, okay, desire circuit wants the impulsivity, wants the donut, then control circuit, then the control circuit is sort of accessing yourself. Like, what do you hold to be true about you? Do you hold yourself to be a healthy person that would eat a donut in this moment, or do you not hold that thing to be true? Do you think that's roughly how that circuit's working, interacting with the self?
It raises a very fascinating point. I talked about how the rational control circuit can work against the irrational desire circuit. I think the example you give is the desire circuit working against itself in some ways. Remember, the control circuit has no motivation. So let me give you an example. So I say, I don't know. I really want this thing. I can't afford it, so I'm going to steal it, right? But I've got values, and one of my values is you don't take things that don't belong to you. And if I don't live up to those values, I'm going to feel bad about myself. I'm going to feel ashamed and guilty, and I don't want that. I want to feel good about myself. And so here we've got the desire circuit saying, I want that phone I can't afford. Maybe I'll steal it. At the same time, the desire circuit is saying, I want to be someone who lives consistent with my values. So it points to the unbelievable complexity of the brain and the unbelievable complexity of the human condition. We constantly have conflicting desires that drive us crazy. And part of wisdom is learning how to manage those conflicting desires.
Right. Have you come up with any wisdom that you think works in that? Because I think that's the ultimate question here, really, is if someone in 2025 is resonating with this desire circuit a bit more than they would like, that they think this desire circuit sort of sounds like me. I tend to be impulsive. I will grab the donut in the evening. I tend to do the quick, fast dopamine hit, as per se, even though I would love for you to define that, because I think that's something thrown around a lot, versus the control circuit. So if somebody is feeling that their dopamine desire circuit is hijacking them when they would like more control activity there, what would be your advice for them?
So, I think back to a couple of philosophers that I read. And the first is Socrates. And he said, the unexamined life is not worth living. So a key ingredient in this is going to be spending a significant amount of time reflecting on your life, particularly your values. What are my values? What's important to me? Why? Where did that come from? Did it come from other people? Maybe those values were instilled in me by parents, teachers, peers. And that's a good thing, but you need to evaluate, is that authentic? Do I really believe that? You've got to find your own authentic values with the understanding that that will change over the course of your life. What you value at age 20 is not going to be what you value at age 40. So I think we have to really examine it and think about, what is my purpose? Why am I here? What is my long-term goal? Some famous statement is, start with the end in mind. What are you trying to accomplish? And that requires reflection, thought, and meditation on your own self. And then the second philosopher that comes to mind is Nietzsche. And this is kind of a confusing statement, so we need to unpack a little bit. But he said, he who has a why can endure any how.
Right.
And basically what that means is that if you have a purpose, you will accomplish it no matter what. You will break through anything to get it.
Right.
And that's very important. Classically, we used to think that the goal of life was to achieve happiness. Aristotle said that. Everything we do is for the purpose of happiness. We get up in the morning to go to work, to get a paycheck. Well, why? To pay the bills. Why pay the bills? So electricity doesn't get turned off. Ultimately, at the end of every string of whys is because I want to be happy. That's the classical view. And we no longer believe that. And the reason we no longer believe that is because people will sacrifice happiness to things that are important to them. They will sacrifice happiness for their children, for a cause, for a politician, for a lover. And so it's not happiness that's the most important thing. It's achieving meaning, which is about values and purpose, feelings of belonging, those kinds of things. So I think that's the way you do it. We spoke about how the desire circuit can want conflicting things at the same time. You need to identify the healthy wants and amplify those. And you do that by thinking about one's purpose in life, who one is, values, belonging, those sorts of things.
It's a really nice answer, and I like how you tied in so much things into it. What's your take on dopamine detoxing? Big buzzword at the moment, was thrown around for years. 24 hours not scrolling on TikTok and crazy, your heroin addiction is solved. That was kind of how it was advertised to the masses. What's your take on, I like dopamine fasting as a slightly more scientific technical term, but what's your overall stance on dopamine fasting, dopamine detoxing?
Yeah. All right. So I think comparing it to heroin addiction is useful. If somebody is addicted to heroin, and you get them inpatient and you detoxify them, it might take about a week. And heroin's out of their system, and maybe they've used so much heroin that they're tolerant, and they inject, and it doesn't even get them high anymore. They go through the detoxification, and now it gets them high again. And sometimes people overdose after detox. They give their last dose, and it's too much. All right, so we can do that in about a week. But even after they're detoxified, they still experience craving for heroin. Right. So their journey isn't over. Well, we might ask, all right, well, how long does it take for them to get over that craving? For some people, it's a lifetime.
Yeah.
Some people will go to 12-step meetings for the rest of their life. And so that's the problem with dopamine detox. If you're in a situation where you're hitting your dopamine system too much, you're scrolling on social media, who knows what else you're doing. If you stay away from that from a few days, when you go back to it, you will get the dopamine hits again. But if your use of it has gotten out of control such that it's interfering with other aspects of your life, you're scrolling when you're with friends or family and you're ignoring them, or you're scrolling when you're supposed to be working and you're less productive. A brief detox is not going to help that, just like a brief detox isn't going to help a heroin addict overcome their craving and their risk of relapse. So if a dopamine behavior has become maladaptive in your life, degrading the quality of your relationships, your ability to work or enjoy other things, a brief detox is not going to help that at all. What you're going to need to do is a long-term change in your habits.
What are we talking about specifically in terms of timelines? If we take a few maybe addictive common behaviors that people might have, social media, doom scrolling being one of them, take pornography, take cannabis, alcohol. Do we have a good idea on what obviously, to add the nuance, you have to have what the person was using. But can we have a general conversation about the timelines that each of those things might take in a regular scenario?
Yeah. So the first day is going to be incredibly difficult and incredibly unpleasant. The next few days are going to be very difficult and very unpleasant. After a month, it's going to get a little easier. After 3 months, it's going to get significantly easier, but you're probably going to struggle for a year. And even after the year is over, if you're under stress, those cravings for the behavior are going to come back, and you're going to have to fight them if you don't want to relapse.
How does stress impact it? That's an interesting one.
Yeah. How does stress impact it? It's complicated. Stress activates fight or flight circuits in the brain. You don't think very clearly when your fight or flight circuits are activated. You start acting instinctually, right? The instincts take over. And so you might start swinging. You might run away. Or in modern society, we don't do that so much, but you just might feel this agitation and you just can't think through it. And so when people are under stress, more primitive instinctual behaviors come online, like stress eating. We go for those sugars and the fats. Some people get angry. That primitive rage comes out. So the primitive behaviors come. And if somebody has developed a dopamine addiction or bad habit, that's also going to be activated.
Right. Seems very similar to sickness behavior. When we're very sick and we have a fever, we immediately want sugar. My thing is I just like to play strategy games. I'll just go play video games for a day. And that's just my sickness thing. I just crave that impulsivity. It's like the dopamine just pulling as hard as it can into the mesolimbic circuits rather than the mesocortical. The desire circuits are overrun.
Yeah. Also, dopamine's always trying to get its way. And so it will say, if you eat this or play the strategy game, it will be soothing. And maybe it is a little bit, but it's pretty short-lived.
Right. What do most people get wrong about dopamine?
Most people get wrong is that they think it is the pleasure molecule, but it's not. The only pleasure it gives is the pleasure of novelty. If you do something that gave you pleasure once, great. You do it a second time, not so much. And I think an example of that is, maybe you're out with friends and you're having an unbelievable time. And you're like, oh my God, this is the most fun we ever had. We got to do this again. And do it again. It's nothing like the first time.
Right.
Right. In mythology, they say the water of life is never found in the same place twice. So I think that's the mistake that people make, not understanding that dopamine's only about novelty. And that's why it's more. It will never let you rest. And you need to tame it like a rider taming a wild horse. It can be an unbelievably powerful tool that can help you achieve your goals like nothing else can. But you got to know how to ride that horse or you're going to get in trouble.
So if dopamine's not related to pleasure and you're having a pleasurable experience, how is dopamine and those other chemicals that are causing the pleasure interacting? What's happening in those moments?
Yeah, so I think we can think about two distinct kinds of pleasure, a dopamine pleasure and a here and now pleasure. Dopamine pleasure is characterized by excitement, anticipation, often feelings of confidence. Something great is about to happen. Let me give you an example of that from a great work of literature, Winnie the Pooh. Christopher Robin asks Winnie the Pooh, what do you like best in the world? And of course, Winnie the Pooh is about to answer eating honey. But then he stops and he thinks that there's a moment just before he starts to eat honey that's even better than eating honey itself, but he didn't know what it was called. That's dopamine. Dopamine hits us with the anticipation, not the getting. So again, excitement, enthusiasm, energy, confidence, that's dopamine pleasure. Here and now pleasure is more of a sense of fulfillment and satisfaction. Here and now pleasure occurs with the senses. So when you're just about to put a delicious piece of perfectly cooked steak in your mouth, that's dopamine. When you taste the steak and chew it and enjoy it, that's here and now. And they're two different pleasures. And a lot of people don't bother experiencing the second one, right? They go, oh, I'm going to go to this great restaurant. You know, I'm going to have this fantastic $50 steak. And then they get to the restaurant and they're just chewing it. And they're not even, you know, they're talking to their friend, what's that? What bar are we going to go to after this? And they're not even experiencing it.
Right.
So really two distinct kinds of pleasure.
It can be very difficult though, right? Like, especially I've been running companies for a couple of years now, and it's just extremely hard sometimes to take that moment to be present, because you have so many things going on in your business and you're trying to push things forward and you have to move uphill. You know, there's a big mountain there, and any time that you're spending time thinking about it now, you're not progressing up the mountain. Do you believe it is possible for people to have a very good fine tuning between, okay, now it's work time, you know, from 9 till 7 or whatever it is, it's all going to be dopaminergic drive. I'm just going to bam, 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 bam. And then when the evening comes, they can switch off. They can be present. They can enjoy the steak. They can have a very rich, like, sensory experience of what's happening around them, and they're very present. Is that possible?
Well, before we talk about whether it's possible or not, let's first acknowledge how difficult it is.
Yeah.
All right. You know, after researching this book, I realized that I was very imbalanced toward dopamine, and I had to make an effort to strengthen my here and now circuits.
Right.
Ever since the pandemic, I've been able to work from home. And so instead of spending 45 minutes on the Washington, D.C. metro, I take a walk in the park, and it's absolutely lovely. And that's a moment when I need to be in the here and now. Experiencing nature. Experiencing nature is so helpful for the brain. And so I bring myself in the here and now. I see the beauty. You know, I smell the smells. I feel the cool air of the morning. And I say to myself, this is so pleasurable. I'm enjoying it so much. And now I'm going to stop because it's so damn hard. And I'm going to think about the future. I'm going to think about what project I'm working on.
Right.
All right. So I know how important it is. I've been practicing it. And it feels so good when I do it. Nevertheless, after a relatively few moments, I stop because it's so hard. All right. So where does that leave us? In order to do things that are hard, it's going to take a long, long time. Most people could do 30 push-ups, but it could take them a few months to work up to that.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So doing things that are hard takes time, and often involves repeated failures. So when we want to achieve something like that, what we need to do is we need to form an intention. We don't have the free will necessarily to do what we want to do. I don't have the free will to be in the here and now on my morning walk the entire time. I just can't do it. But I do have the free will to form any intention that I want. So I form an intention. After work is over, I come home, and when my loved ones talk to me, listen to them. I don't think about something else. When I eat my dinner, I taste it. I feel the textures. I don't think about something else. So you make that intention and then you fail. Well, that's okay. That doesn't change the intention. You try again and you fail a million times. And the longer you do it, maybe instead of failing 99% of the time, you fail 92% of the time. And that's progress.
Yeah.
And so much of what we read online and sometimes even in books is, here's some life hacks, to make it easy. Right. And that's those are lies. Growing as a person is hard.
Right.
And if it were easy, life would be boring and meaningless. We want things to be hard. We were born with capabilities. We want to use them. The Alaskan dog sled, when it gets old, it doesn't want to retire and relax. It wants to die in the traces pulling the sled. And so it's a good thing that life is hard. It's a good thing that we face challenges. And it's very unhealthy to pretend that there are shortcuts.
Right. I love that. And I love the Alaskan dog sled example. I'm going to give that to loads of people. I'm going to steal that completely. I think it's one of the reasons that I picked up triathlon is that I was getting frustrated with this idea of just sitting on my laptop and tapping away all day and only moving in that direction. And sport's always been a big part of my life. I was a tennis coach for 11 years. I've played sport at a high level for my entire life. Since I was 2, I've had a tennis racket in my hand. So for me, like committing to running, cycling, and swimming every day was just committing to doing a hard thing every single day. And I have this idea in my head that I want to get your opinion on. How does doing those hard things change the control circuits and the desire circuits in your head? Like I can say anecdotally that if I go out and I run in the morning and I tick that box, I'm less likely to spend that time on TikTok. That if I go out for my swim in the evening, I'm less likely to, fill that time with any activity that was desire circuit, driven, let's say. Is there truth to that? Is there truth that doing hard things consolidates and reinforces the model you have for doing hard things, and that the requisite of that is that it makes you less likely to become a drug addict? It makes you less likely to watch porn, makes you less likely to smoke cannabis, whatever it is. Is there truth to that?
Yes, there is. The brain is hard to change, and that's good and bad. So, for example, you mentioned that you play tennis, right? So, imagine the first time you were trying to hit a ball. Maybe you had a coach telling you, where to put your arm when you start, how to do the swing, the motions to go through. Your coach tells you in great detail all the things you need to do. You do it, and the result is absolutely horrible.
Right.
And you got to think it through, and you got to use so much effort. And you practice and practice and practice. After you do it 10,000 times, it's more or less effortless, right?
Absolutely.
If you do that, you might not play tennis for 10 years. You pick up the racket and boom, it comes right back. It's still there.
Right.
You've locked it in, right? So it was very, very hard for you to rearrange those circuits in your brain so that the tennis swing is effortless without thought. And once you lock that in, as we say, you never forget how to ride a bike. That's a common thing. So it's the same thing here. If you want to do hard things every day, in the beginning, it's going to be hard. It's going to take an enormous amount of willpower. But if you've been doing it for years, it becomes habitual. And it will be hard not to do hard things, right? Somebody who does a hard run every morning, if they can't do that run, they're very unhappy. They're very dissatisfied. They need to do the hard thing. And Aristotle spoke about that in terms of morality. He said that if you want to be honest in big things, you've got to be honest in small things, because virtue is a habit. You can't say, it's okay for me to steal paper clips from the office, but if something really big comes along, I'm going to be honest. Well, maybe you will, but unfortunately, you're, just like you train your brain to hit the tennis ball,
right.
You're training your brain to ignore the rules.
Right.
Right. So the answer is yes. You want to develop good habits so that you don't have to push yourself every time. Doing the right thing, doing hard things, having your control circuit guide your behavior to be rational becomes second nature.
Right. I do believe the expression "how you do some things is how you do everything." Right. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What about cold water? Cold immersion is something that's been really big as well in the last couple of years, and it doesn't really matter to me how you do it, if it's a cold shower or a plunge. But what is the evidence on cold plunging and dopamine say?
I'm not that familiar with it. My knowledge of cold plunges is mainly about muscle repair.
Right.
I know that if you splash your face with cold water, especially if the cold water gets in your nostrils, that has an anti-anxiety effect. So, if you're very nervous before an interview or something, run to the bathroom and splash some cold water on your face, and your anxiety will come down. That's not dopamine, though.
Yeah, mammalian dive reflex, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. No, I'm just curious because it's been a huge trend at the moment, and I don't know if it even is really in line with the most recent dopamine research. Everyone will always say, do this, 250% increase in dopamine, right? I made a big video about Andrew Huberman. Yeah, I made a big video about Andrew Huberman was talking about cold plunging and how it increases dopamine by 250%. And he was saying this on podcast after podcast after podcast. And the dopamine was in the body. It was in the peripheral nervous system. So it wasn't even in the brain because it's very difficult to measure dopamine.
And it doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you can take dopamine supplements. They'll do nothing.
Right. Exactly. So this is a really common thing. Do you think any sort of practice supplement that promises dopamine increases, like, one, it's very hard to say if that's necessarily even a good thing because you don't know where your baseline is. You don't know if you're a almost schizophrenic gambling addict. Dopamine is not what you need then. But do you believe these sort of claims, these courses, these kind of supplements, increasing your baseline dopamine levels? Do you think this is all garbage?
Yes, I do.
Great.
Yeah, you can increase dopamine in your frontal lobes by taking medications designed to treat ADHD. You can increase dopamine temporarily in your desire circuit by using heroin or watching pornography or scrolling. That's about it.
Amazing. I obviously share that opinion, and a big part of what I try and do in this channel is to debunk and demystify all these concepts. Daniel, this conversation I thought was incredibly enjoyable. I've learned so much. As I said, the Molecule of More was incredibly influential for me, both as a scientific communicator and as someone who was just trying to understand the brain a little bit more. And I think everyone through listening to this conversation is going to have a much more nuanced idea of what dopamine is, how it impacts them. What would you leave the listeners as a final takeaway on all of the implications of basically everything that we've talked about of how dopamine really works? What do you think is your one takeaway for everybody?
Yeah, so I would go back to what Socrates said, know thyself. We think that we have total control inside of our heads. I can think about anything that I want. I think about Jupiter. I can think about a salami sandwich. But that's not true. Our brains are biological machines, just like our bodies. And yeah, we have some control over it, but not that much. And so you've got to learn what's going on up there, because the more you know, the more you're going to be able to work with it in order to accomplish your goals. And you're not going to be a passive victim of these crazy chemicals that can drive you to do things that could destroy your life.
Right.